I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was just past 10, the diner nearly empty except for the hum of the neon sign outside and the faint clatter of dishes from the back. I slid into the booth by the window, the one with the cracked vinyl that smelled faintly of syrup and old coffee. She was already there, perched on the edge of the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair tucked behind one ear like she always did when she was focused. "Hey," she said without looking up, but there was that tiny lift of her brow that made it sound like an invitation. "Hey," I said, fumbling with my jacket zipper. I'd been here before, enough times that the waitress barely glanced at me, but it never felt routine when she was around. "Coffee?" she asked, though I'd only ever taken it black. No sugar, no cream. "That's ya. Black," I said a little too quickly. I caught her flicking her eyes toward my hands as I folded my napkin, trying not to look like a kid caught staring. She smiled then, slow and almost secretive. "Still the same. I like that." I shifted in my seat, noticing the small, quiet details. How she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, how her fingers lingered on the edge of the cup when she picked it up, how the steam from her own mug curled between us like smoke from a candle I hadn't lit. The diner felt smaller then, tighter, though nothing had changed. I'd been alone more than I liked to admit, habits that went unnoticed even by friends, paused texts I'd never send, half-formed messages that sat in drafts, fingers hovering over the keys as if the words themselves might betray me. "So, how's college?" she asked. Her voice was light, but I caught that little tension behind it, like she was trying not to stumble into more than small talk. "Busy," I said. "Too busy, maybe." My throat tightened, and I looked down at the table, tracing the faded ring of a coffee cup stain with my finger. "It's fine." She nodded, not pressing further. I noticed how her eyes lingered a little too long on the steam curling up from my mug, like she was thinking of something that wasn't there. And maybe she was. Maybe she thought about things she'd never say out loud, about nights that didn't belong to anyone else. There was a pause, just enough for me to consider standing up, leaving, pretending the world outside the diner was enough. But I didn't. I watched her flick a sugar packet in her cup with that precise, careless gesture, and I wanted to say something. Anything, but the words got caught halfway down my throat. She glanced at the clock, a small frown crossing her face, like she couldn't quite remember if she was supposed to leave or stay. "You're here late," she said softly, almost to herself. "Yeah," I whispered. I looked out the window, watching the streetlights bend over puddles from the afternoon rain. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message, her name on the screen. "Don't go home just yet. Wait for me." I didn't know what it meant or why she'd sent it, but something in my chest loosened, like a door I didn't know was closed had just cracked open. And I waited. She met me at the corner, umbrella half closed, her coat still damp from the drizzle. I had thought she might be busy. Her life wasn't mine to claim, but there she was, tilting her head like she'd been waiting. We walked without saying much, the kind of quiet that isn't uncomfortable, but loaded like you're both aware of every step and glance. "You know," she said finally, voice low as we passed a row of lit storefronts, "my son used to hate the rain." She glanced at me, almost as if checking I was still there. "Would stomp in puddles anyway, ruin every pair of shoes I bought him." I nodded, imagining it. A little boy, stubborn, defiant. "Sounds lively," I said. My voice sounded hollow even to me. She smiled, the edges of her mouth softening. Lively is one word for it. Her eyes flicked to mine, and I felt the quiet pull of something I couldn't name. It wasn't just that she was my friend's mom. It was the weight of knowing her, of noticing her in ways that had nothing to do with age or rules. I tried to push it down, imagining her with someone else, imagining this never happened. But in the same breath, I wanted it to. At her apartment, I helped her carry groceries, the plastic bags crinkling between us, fingers brushing once, accidentally. She laughed a small, nervous sound, and I froze for half a second longer than I should have. "You're careful," she said, watching me set the bags on the counter. She didn't look away, and the room felt smaller, warmer. We sat at the table with tea, cups steaming between us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I traced the rim of mine, watching her fingers linger on her cup. I wondered if she knew how much I was thinking about her. Not just her presence, but the way she made my chest tighten and my thoughts spin into places I couldn't follow. I didn't think I'd see you tonight, I said, the words lighter than my heart felt. I didn't either, she admitted, eyes lowering for a moment. Then, almost as an afterthought, divorce can be lonely. You learn small comforts count for a lot. Something in me twisted. I wanted to ask her what that meant, wanted to press, wanted to lean closer, but I didn't. Instead, I listened, letting the weight of the unsaid fill the space. Her gaze returned to me, slow and deliberate, and she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I wanted to reach out, but instead I caught her hand briefly as she adjusted the cup. Just a brush of skin, nothing more, and yet it lingered. She laughed quietly, shaking her head, and it felt like a secret shared only between us. You're quiet, she said. I like that. I didn't answer. I only watched her, letting the silence hold everything. That touch, the smallest thing, told me more than anything she could have said. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I hadn't expected her to be there when I stopped by that evening. The hall smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener, a little too domestic for my nerves. I paused outside her door, hesitated, thinking maybe tonight wasn't the night. But then her laugh drifted down the corridor, soft, unguarded, and I stepped in. She was at the kitchen counter again, apron dusted with flour. You came back, she said, tone light, but not careless. Eyes darted to mine, then away, as if checking herself against the idea of me standing there. Yeah, I said, swallowing. I thought I'd see how you were. There was that pause she always had when she weighed words. She reached for a mug, fingers brushing against mine as she passed it. I felt the shock of it, the sharp, quiet pull of wanting more, but knowing I shouldn't. We didn't talk much. She chopped vegetables, I set plates. The mundane rhythm held us close in a way words couldn't. I caught her glance over the edge of the counter, quick, fleeting, but long enough that I thought she might be inviting something she couldn't name. The sound of a key in the lock froze us both. Her son. He came in laughing, oblivious, dragging his backpack down the hall. She flinched, and I stepped back. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the groceries. Hey, Mom, he called, tossing his jacket on the chair. I thought I heard someone in here. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed me my cup of tea. I took it, pretending nothing happened. We smiled at each other over the rim, but the tension didn't leave. Later, when he disappeared into his room, we ended up in the living room, sitting side by side on her couch. The TV flickered with some muted program I barely noticed. I traced the seam of the cushion with my thumb, watching her sip her tea. Do you like this city? She asked suddenly. Quiet, almost casual. I hesitated. I guess. It's fine. My eyes caught hers, but she looked away, folding her hands neatly in her lap, like the motion could shield her from anything too forward. I thought about leaning closer. Just an inch, maybe to brush my hand against hers, but I stopped. Something, maybe instinct, maybe fear, kept me tethered to this small, contained moment. Her gaze returned, soft and searching. There was a twitch in her lips, a tension in her shoulders. Something unspoken hung in the air, between the words she didn't say and the movement she didn't make. I imagined it, a kiss, a whisper, the slow slide of hands, but my own hand stayed planted firmly on my knee. My chest tightened, heartbeat loud in the quiet room. And then she shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward the couch's edge. Not away, but not forward either. Half an inch, a breath apart. It felt like standing on the edge of something, the ground beneath trembling. I wanted to ask. I wanted to confess. I wanted something, but all I did was watch her, fingers grazing the mug, eyes tracing my silhouette, and I realized how much I didn't know about her, how much she didn't know about me. And still we lingered. The park was nearly empty, just the rustle of bare branches in the evening wind. I followed her along the gravel path, careful not to step too close, careful not to breathe too loud. The sky had that gray-pink light that made everything feel fragile, like the world could break if you touched it wrong. She stopped at a bench, the one facing the pond. I hesitated before sitting, leaving a measured space between us. She traced a line on the weathered wood with her finger, slow, deliberate. I I saw him today, she said, voice low, almost brittle. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I already knew. Her shoulders tightened, and I noticed a tremor in her hands. She wasn't just telling me. She was letting a wall fall. He said something. He thinks I should start seeing someone. Someone closer to him, safer, whatever that means. I swallowed, feeling that same tight pull in my chest. And I asked, though my voice sounded small even to me. And I thought, I don't know, that maybe I'd feel jealous, or guilty, or something. But I just felt empty, she said. Pause. She looked down at her lap. And then I thought of you. I froze, my hand hovering over the space beside her. Not touching, not daring, but alive with the possibility of contact. Her gaze flicked up, caught mine, and then away again. The air between us was heavier than anything either of us said. I shouldn't, she murmured. I know that. But sometimes I think, if you weren't just my friend's kid or whatever, maybe she trailed off and the world narrowed to that bench, the pond, the cold light on her face. My own chest ached with wanting, with the knowledge that something in both of us was on the verge of tipping. I imagined the brush of lips, the warmth of a hand, but I stayed still, letting the moment hold its fragile balance. I can't, she said again, softer this time, and I thought I could see the storm inside her, the tug-of-war between desire and reason. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched. I traced the edge of her sleeve with my eyes, noticing the way her fingers curled unconsciously like she was holding herself together from inside out. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The wind shifted. The quiet stretched long and thin between us. And then she asked, almost to herself, almost to me, do you ever wish things were different? I didn't answer. Not yet. But I wanted to. The diner smelled like toast and old coffee when I walked in, but the booth by the window was empty. Her usual spot. My pulse tightened without realizing it at first. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. She didn't come. At first, I thought maybe she was busy, maybe a client, errands, one of those invisible things that made her life complicated. But by the time the sun had dipped past the blinds, I felt a small, quiet twist in my chest. Something had shifted. I texted her once. Everything okay? No reply. I kept imagining what could be wrong. Had I overstepped? Said something she regretted? Or had she pulled back on purpose? The thoughts were jagged, unfinished, my mind leaping over details and stopping short of conclusions. The next evening, I saw her at the park from across the street. She was alone, but not moving toward me. She glanced down at her phone, then shifted her bag from one shoulder to the other, and the way she didn't look up, it was a deliberate absence. I wanted to cross, to speak, but my feet stayed planted. A part of me recognized the silent line she had drawn, and a larger part wished I could ignore it. Later that week, I heard from a friend, someone who noticed things I try to hide. She just seems tired, they said, shrugging. Or maybe it's complicated. You know, the divorce, the kid, the rest. And then it clicked. Not the kid. He was always there, alive in the spaces between us, but everything she carried. Ex-husband, lingering regrets, a life mapped out before I even existed. I'd only seen the surface, the soft edges. I imagined her mornings alone, coffee in hand, thinking about me or not. I imagined her evenings, the door shutting quietly behind her, hands folded in her lap, wondering about the boy who'd grown into someone she shouldn't notice. I wrote a message late at night, typed the words over and over. I miss you. But I didn't send it. It sat in drafts, blinking at me with an accusing patience. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The seat by the window remained empty for days. I would glance, almost unconsciously, as if seeing it filled again could reset the quiet tension, erase the hesitations, and fold the world back into its previous rhythm. But it didn't, and I didn't knock on her door, didn't try to fix the silence. I just waited, holding on to the small hope that she might return on her own terms, that the pause wouldn't last forever. For now, the story was in limbo, and so were we. She opened the door before I could knock. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and the faint spice of something she'd been cooking. I hesitated, glancing down at my shoes, like the weight of my own indecision could hold me steady. "Hey," she said, almost too casually. Her hand lingered on the doorframe, the other holding a tea mug. The steam curled between us. "Hey," I replied, voice low, careful. I wanted to step inside. I wanted to turn back. I didn't. We moved to the kitchen. She set her mug down, and I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, trying to keep the flutter in my chest from spilling out. Silence stretched, thick but not uncomfortable. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," she said. Her eyes avoided mine for a fraction too long, then met mine with that subtle tremor of honesty. I had to," I said. The words felt clumsy. Heavy. True. "I've been thinking." I trailed off, letting the pause hold more than I could say. She nodded. "Me too," her voice barely above a whisper. There was the admission, fragile and raw. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just real. We moved closer without realizing it. Our hands almost brushed when she reached for the kettle. I wanted to take hers to steady her, or myself, but stopped, letting the air carry the tension. "I don't know if this is right," she said finally, "or if I should." Her eyes flicked down, back up. Vulnerability sharpened her edges. I swallowed. "I don't know either," I said, "but I needed to know, needed to tell you." She smiled, a small, hesitant curve that didn't erase the weight of what she'd said but softened it. I felt my chest unclench slightly, even as the consequences hovered, invisible but present. We stood there for a long moment. I noticed how her fingers lingered on the edge of the counter, how the kettle's whistle seemed distant, how every ordinary sound felt amplified. Then she reached out, not dramatically, not with a flourish, just her hand brushing mine lightly. Enough to say what words couldn't, enough to acknowledge what had been simmering quietly between us for weeks. I let my hand rest against hers. The touch was minimal, restrained, but it carried the entire weight of what we hadn't dared say. Recognition, desire, caution, and hope, all tangled together. She gave a soft, almost imperceptible laugh, a sound of relief and acknowledgement. "Okay," she said, just that. And somehow it said everything. No grand declarations. No promises. Just a quiet, human connection that made the world feel a little steadier, a little less lonely. We didn't move closer. We didn't need to. The touch lingered, a tether in the small, ordinary kitchen, enough to hold us both for the moment. And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed, then months. The park bench where we had almost confessed became a quiet ritual. Saturday mornings, 8:47 a.m., the world just waking and the pond still glimmering. She brought her tea, on my black coffee. No words were required beyond the small acknowledgments. The way she brushed crumbs from the bench, the way I folded my napkin exactly 3 times before sipping. The diner became ours again, quietly. I'd slide into the cracked vinyl booth, and she'd appear with that same gentle smile, as if the world had finally allowed her to show up. Not because it had to, not because anyone demanded it, but because she wanted to. Her son had grown accustomed to seeing me around, a quiet presence in the edges of their life. No explanations, no awkward conversations, just familiarity, trust, and a recognition of boundaries carefully held. She told me about her day in fragments, about errands, clients, the small victories and defeats that made up her life. I listened, not needing to fill the silences with words, letting the pauses speak instead. And sometimes I told her about classes, coffee orders gone wrong, or the odd thing that happened in the city. Small, inconsequential, but enough to make her laugh or tilt her head thoughtfully. There were no dramatic declarations, no fireworks. Just mornings where she left the sugar slightly askew in my cup, where I caught her hand brushing mine, barely, across the table. Subtle, quiet, enduring. One evening, we walked home along a wet street after rain. The city lights reflected in puddles, and she slowed her pace, so ours aligned. I didn't hold her hand, not yet, but I could feel the space between us shrink, and it felt normal, right? The emotional tension that had once coiled tight between us had softened into something steady. The ache of wanting hadn't disappeared, but it had been tempered by knowing, by mutual understanding, by the tiny, repeated gestures that said everything without saying anything at all. I made her coffee one Saturday, black, exactly how she liked it, and she took it with that faint smile that had haunted me months before. We sat side by side, watching the steam curl between us. She didn't lean in, I didn't speak, but the world felt aligned in a way it hadn't before. And later, when she tucked a stray hair behind her ear and glanced at me, I realized I didn't need more. I didn't need a declaration or a perfect moment. I only needed this, the quiet understanding, the shared space, the small intimacies. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled faintly, knowing she understood the meaning of it. She caught my gaze, returned it with a tilt of her head, and in that simple acknowledgement, the story of us had settled into place. Not perfect, not loud, but ours. And as the sun hit the pond just right, I thought, only we would notice how the world had shifted in the spaces between ordinary mornings.